Hello, in this video we are going to discuss the project delivery system of Eglinton Crosstown Light Rail Transit project. My name is Faizan and my team members are Neha, Shifat and Adel. The Eglinton Crosstown Light Rail Transit ECLRT project will facilitate approximately 5,500 passengers during peak hours via 19-kilometer light rail transit with 25 stations by 2031 and is estimated to cost the province about $9.1 billion. The ECLRT project is of critical importance to renew public services, particularly to meet the province's long-term plan to amalgamate transportation network between Greater Toronto Area and Hamilton, and addressing the growing needs of projected expansion of Greater Golden Horseshoe (GGH) through rapid transit projects. This project will improve travel times, enhance ridership, reduce traffic, and boost economic activity. Public-private partnership (PPP) or P3 in Ontario dates back to early 90s and since then has gained popularity in creating infrastructure that embraces business between the government and the private sector to boost innovation, greater value for money and better practices. To facilitate this partnership, Infrastructure Ontario (IO), a government agency, has been tasked with promoting PPP model. The major principles of IO are transparency, value for money, accountability, public ownership and control, and public interest. IO uses an alternate financing and procurement AFP model when it comes to major infrastructure in Ontario instead of traditional design bid build project delivery method. The project delivery method for the ECLRT project is AFP. Major stakeholders in the ECLRT project and how they link with each other is shown in the figure. Infrastructure Ontario is responsible for legal support and to administer the AFP contract. Metrolinx carries out the planning aspect of the project through its technical advisory services consulting firm, while the program management services consulting firm oversees the project and tracks progress with the terms of the contract. Toronto Transit Commission (TTC) will deal with operation phase of the LRT and will also review and approve all design aspects that affects them. Other entities include the Government of Toronto, telecommunication and utilities companies, which will play their respective roles during the plan and construction phase of the project. The AFP consortium refers to the private sector company that has been tasked to design, construct and maintain the structure for 30 years along with financing the project as well. After rigorous bidding process, the AFP contract was awarded to Crosstown Transit Solutions in 2015 for construction to end in 2021. The key objectives of the ECLRT project includes increase in urban transit capacity, design excellence, congestion management, and seamless customer service. It is the task of the AFP consortium to meet these objectives throughout the contract, otherwise they could be charged with penalty. For this project, a thorough literature review was done. Once project scope and objectives are defined, the next step is to choose a project delivery system. Crosstown, the selected contractor for this project, is responsible for the design, build, finance, and maintenance (DBFM) of the ECLRT project. The scope of the proposal includes DBFM of the 25 stations, connecting railway tracks, signal and communication interfaces, and other infrastructures and services using the AFP delivery model. The maintenance phase includes lifecycle maintenance services of the LRT system, which includes repair and renewal of the building, system, and structural components. Firstly, a value for money (VFM) assessment for the project is conducted to see if the AFP model would be profitable or not. The life cycle cost for the same project using a traditional design bid-build model and an alternate finance and procurement model is calculated, and the difference between them is termed as value for money. The life cycle cost includes the design and construction cost, transaction cost, and the risk retained cost. The value for money assessment is conducted in 3 stages of the procurement process, which are: first one is IO first demonstrates that the proposed AFP delivery method generates a positive VFM, so approval from the board of directors can be obtained and they release a request for proposal RFP. After this, the bidding process can be initiated. Second stage, once bidding is closed, the selected bid is compared with the cost of traditional project delivery model, also known as the public sector comparator PSC. Once again, only a positive VFM will ensure approval from the board of directors and execution of the project agreement can start. The third stage, after project agreement finishes, IO releases a public report that contains a final VFM analysis, project details, the procurement process, and the project agreement. The life cycle of a project can be grouped into 4 tasks, which are planning and designing of the project, financing the project, construction, operation and maintenance of the physical assets. Traditionally, for most public projects, tasks 1, 2, and 4 is performed by the government, and for the construction of the project, contract is awarded to the lowest bid after a tendering process has been conducted. But since the last 20 years, the public sector has joined hands with private sector and used their expertise for more than just the construction stage through a public-private partnership. This leads to economic efficiency, risk mitigation strategies, and technological innovations. The different types of PPP contracts are based on the roles that the private sector plays during the life cycle of the project. The figure here shows how each PPP model has low or high level of private sector involvement. It is important to note that the P3 model is never full privatization because the public sector will always be playing a role in infrastructure projects using P3 model. It will, however, be taking a slightly smaller role in the project, and its role may be limited by providing project requirements and specifications and monitoring the progress of the project. According to these specifications, the private consortium will design, finance, construct, operate and maintain the facility as per the contract. Any inadequacy in meeting the fixed specifications will result in a deduction in payments to the private sector. Now we will discuss the benefits of the P3 model. By tasking financing and multiple project responsibilities under one contract to the private sector, a lot of benefits to the public sector are achieved when using a P3 model. One of them being the allotment of risk from the public sector to the private sector. When we say that risk is transferred to the private sector, what risk are we talking about? The type of risk would depend upon the role that the private sector is playing in the project, as different risks arise from the different project phases. Some key risks transferred would be associated with design, construction delays, cost overrun, and finance and insurance. Still, the public sector had to ensure that the money is spent economically. Another opportunity that arises when the single party is responsible for the design, construction, and maintenance phase of the project is that they are able to utilize the creativity and capability of the private sector. In a traditional project delivery model, where the private sector is only responsible for the construction phase, innovativeness is limited to only this phase, which may not affect the cost a lot. But in P3, the private sector has an incentive to come up with solutions and ideas that will reduce the cost associated with the facility operation and maintenance. Since project managers are also involved early on from the project and are responsible for design, construction, and operations, they apply a more holistic approach when planning project details, and any cost saved during the construction can be better utilized during operations. This approach has led to more efficient designs and financial savings for an infrastructure project during its life cycle. A byproduct of the above-mentioned benefit is the concept of value for money, as explained earlier. It is a potentially saved lifecycle cost when a P3 model is used instead of a traditional procurement model. Now comes the disadvantages of P3 model. P3 brings a lot of benefits to the table but has some disadvantages as well. Even though the private and public sectors are both working for the success of the project, they both have some hidden motives, which can create tension between the two. The public sector wants to reduce the short-term expenditures while the private sector wants to boost revenue. For this reason, actions taken up the private sector may not always be the best interest of the public. The concept of VFM analysis that takes place earlier in the project life can be somewhat deceiving, as the project costs rarely support the estimates. Some P3 projects do create cost savings, as P3 projects usually finish before time, but some project often turns out to be expensive for the public. And reasons for this could be a weak contract, lack of planning, etc. Although PPP has its fair share of drawbacks, it still doesn't outweigh the benefits, and most of these can be avoided by thoughtful planning during initial stage. Now comes the discussion and analysis part. The AFP model used for the ECLRT model was design, build, finance, maintain. In this model, the private sector will be designing, building, financing, and maintaining the project, while the operation and ownership of the project stays with the public sector. To discuss and analyze the success of this AFP model with respect to the ECLRT project, a few questions will be answered, which will help to determine what aspects of the project were successful and why. First question: did it tap new money for infrastructure? For many public projects, the capital cost for the project is an issue and can burden the government into taking debts or raising taxes. In case of ECLRT, the DBFM model makes sure that the capital for the project comes from the private sector. In addition to this, any cost overruns, delays would be financed by the AFP consortium. Second question: did it undermine system-wide planning? Transportation is a well-spread network which involves multiple small and large-scale projects. Typically, priorities for such projects are dependent upon the available funding from the government. But with P3 model, private sector has played a vital role in this decision. Some could argue that the involvement of the private sector could disrupt transportation planning, since they would favor these projects that would generate greater returns through a user fees, which might not necessarily be important in terms of regional planning. The ECLRT project is a large-scale project which will cater to the increasing demand that the Toronto public transit system is currently facing. It will facilitate east-west connections and will also link with other transit networks. The City of Toronto is in well need for this project and therefore it does not interfere with any regional or local plans. The DBFM contract of the ECLRT project also does not constrain future infrastructure plans. Since the private sector is not earning revenue from user fares, they would be unaffected with future projects that may reduce ridership from this line. The risk is solely borne by the public sector as they are in charge of operations. Third question is, does the P3 deliver value for money? Since the ECLRT project is still not completed, a VFM analysis for post-construction cannot be conducted. The initial VFM analysis conducted by IO was released to the public. Through this initial assessment, it was found that total savings of $2.18 million or 22% can be achieved if an AFP model is used instead of a traditional approach. Studies around the world show that the P3 involves high transaction costs that relate to structuring and monitoring the agreement, cost premiums to ensure low project cost and on time, cost escalating during project planning, high rate of return to the public sector, etc. This aspect of AFP should be considered from the beginning to ensure cost savings. At this time, it is not possible to claim that the AFP model was successful in creating VFM in case of the ECLRT project. Fourth question. Did it limit community consultation and involvement? Research shows that the significant community consultation and involvement in infrastructure investment, especially for public transit, can lead to foreseeable decision-making processes, reasonable opportunities for stakeholders to provide input into plans, and a transparent and reliable system of incorporating stakeholder contributions into the final project decisions. The ECLRT project has been under the public eye since 2001, when the Transit City Plan was first released. Since 2008, various public consultations and engagement events have been held, which include open houses, public meetings, board meetings, etc. In only 2008 to 2010, about 36 events took place and around 4,000 people took part in these events. Feedback from such events were gathered, which provided basis for the further studies to improve people's experience when the transit system finally opens. In this way, it can be said that the AFP model did not compromise any public consultation or engagement. Fifth question. Were risks transferred to the private sector? As mentioned above, risk transfer to the private sector is one major benefit of choosing an AFP model. For the ECLRT project, the AFP consortium is responsible for the design, construction, financing and maintaining aspect of the project, and it states clearly in the project agreement that any additional cost due to the scheduled overrun will not be paid by the public. So, risk was transferred to the private sector in case of construction and maintenance, although any changes made by IO or any of its employees that causes delays, acts of nature, unforeseeable circumstances will not come out of the private sector's pocket. Another risk associated with the operation phase of the project did not transfer to the private sector because operations will still be handled by TTC. So, If for any reason traffic volume is not as initially estimated, the risk would be borne by the public sector. Sixth question. Did it spur project level innovation? One innovation that can be directly linked with the DBFM model is when these project phases are bundled together and assigned to one party. Decisions like which material to use can lead to cost-saving measures. For example, in the ECLRT project, Crosslinks is also responsible for maintaining the facility for 30 years after construction, so they will use more durable materials, which would result in lower life cycle cost. In case of the ECLRT, Crosslinks came up with the idea to also incorporate a backup power source for any power malfunctions, so there could be no delays in rides and customers will also be satisfied. In conclusion, one can agree that the AFP model adopted by IO in case of the ECLRT project has proven to be beneficial and does in fact tap into those advantages for which it was initially adopted. Some disadvantages which were discussed earlier can be said to be avoided in this project, but they led to additional risk for the public sector. For example, operations. If left in the hands of the private consortium, could lead to greater user fears to increase revenue unless a limit is prescribed in the contract. In case of the ECLRT project, TTC would be responsible for operations, which created a demand risk for which the public sector is accountable. Furthermore, IO's method of adopting AFP for positive value for money analysis seems to underestimate the actual situation. High transaction costs that relate to structuring and monitoring the agreement, cost premiums to ensure low project cost and on-time completion, cost escalation during project planning, high rate of return to the private sector, etc., are some of the aspects which are not initially considered and can create the false image of the actual situation. Moreover, once a project is completed, a VFM analysis should again be conducted to understand current circumstances. This data would also prove to be important for future projects and to improve the VFM analysis.